Okay, we are live.
Right. Good afternoon and welcome to the House Environment Committee. This afternoon, we're going to continue discussing H238, and we have a few witnesses on that. And the first is Joe Sean Uvar. Hope I got that right. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for this opportunity. My name is Joshan Unuvar, and I have a PhD in material science and engineering. And I have been working in the cookware industry for almost 13 years. Today, I'm representing the Cookware and Bakeware Alliance, CBA, which is the widely recognized trade association in US. And I have been leading the CBA Engineering Standards Committee for multiple years. I would like to draw your attention to some simple analogies to make it simple. The animal kingdom is made up of many different animals, and some are dangerous, extremely dangerous, like a lion, right? We wouldn't have lions roaming the streets freely. But how about house pets, right? Like a cat. They look very, very similar, but they have extremely different risk profiles. So should we ignore that and cage or ban all cat families, all animals? So the key message here is that we need to look at different categories and properties of whatever we're considering and evaluate risk scientifically. Unfortunately, what's going on the media is guilt by association. Like, if a John Smith commits a crime, should we hold all John Smiths accountable? Might as well include everyone with the last name Smith. They must be in the same family, right? So that's what's going on. PFOA is bad. It is a PFAS. So all PFAS must be carrying all the bad attributes. This is wrong. And then some advocates are going as far as citing newspaper articles. That should not be acceptable. It's hearsay. And we would like this debate to be guided by science and not emotion or the everyday media. And unfortunately, fluoropolymers get mixed in with this general PFAS issue. PFAS is an assumed or a man-made definition. It's nothing else. The number of chemicals it covers depends on how chemists interpret the definition. And we could be talking about 15,000 different chemicals. There are many different categories. They could be a solid, liquid, or a gas with totally different properties. The clear distinction could be between fluorochemicals like PFOA and fluoropolymers like PTFE. They are totally different. Fluorochemicals like PFOA dissolve in water, bioaccumulate. They have much smaller molecules, so they can enter your body and not exit. But fluoropolymers, on the other hand, do not dissolve in water, do not bioaccumulate. They are not found in the environment. They are not bioavailable. So even tests for these things are different. You test for a fluorochemical, let's say you test for 100 fluorochemicals, is not the same as the test for PTFE because it has different properties. So we need to evaluate risks of different PFAS groups separately, and we need to look at with a scientific perspective. Fluoropolymers like PTFE is in your cookware as well as medical devices, right? And current PFAS pollution did not come from these. Fluoropolymers do not dissolve in water, as we discussed. So if you eat a piece of PTFE, it will go through the other end. Our bodies cannot digest it. Just so, like in medical implants, it's no different than fluoropolymers in cookware. Medical profession has been coating and using pacemaker stents and catheters with fluoropolymers, with no shown toxicity. And otherwise, surgeons would be running away from PTFE as fast as they could, right? I've talked to a surgeon, a medical device creator just recently. He had no doubts about PTFE and uses and defends it. He mentioned to me that he's on the side of science, but yeah. So, but unfortunately, it is being shown as dangerous on the media. And disposal of fluoropolymers do not pose serious threats. Like we said, they don't dissolve in water, so there is no acute contamination that can happen. They do not degrade, but we cannot say the same thing with fluorochemicals. So I'm not here to defend fluorochemicals or sprays on clothing or other chemicals on food packaging, or maybe a ski wax that can immediately contaminate the environment. That's not what's happening with fluoropolymers. And there's been a testimony, I think yesterday, saying like water supplies for millions of people have been contaminated. There needs to be scientific proof of that. There is really nothing about fluoropolymers entering the water or contaminating the waters. So I encourage you to seek specific studies on those claims. And also wanted to touch alternatives. They are alternative nonstick coatings do not have the same performance or durability. They are more expensive for the consumer and last much shorter. And there was some testimony about that PFAS crisis may have begun with fluoropolymers, but it's basically certain manufacturers releasing fluorochemicals or PFOA, but that's no longer the case. But this is exactly what we need to control. We need to find and stop highest releases of fluorochemicals to the environment. Polymers could be in the environment for a long time, but they are inert and non-toxic, and do not bioaccumulate. So what is really the concern here? Rocks are in the environment forever, but so simply using a phrase like forever chemical has become the red herring rally cry to completely ban a definition without scientific consideration. Fluoropolymers are not the concern. And thank you very much for the opportunity to speak at the hearing today.
All right. Do members have questions? Representative Bartholomew.
I'm not sure where to look here. Your testimony is very similar to others we've heard, but are you suggesting any specific changes to the bill we have in front of us? I don't know if you've seen it, or Vermont statute.
So fluoropolymers have been authorized by FDA for a long time, and in Europe, in Japan, Canada, everywhere else in the world. So it doesn't really help the situation to ban fluoropolymers in this case for cookware, because it's not going to have any effect, any effect on the environment. We need to look at biggest polluters. Okay, I understand the dilemma around firefighting foam for aircraft fires, but that's literally pumping fluorochemicals out of a hose and has no comparison to cookware and PTFE. So what you are trying to do is not going to be achieved by banning fluoropolymers in cookware.
They already banned in existing law. It's already done. Okay. Another question I had. May I ask another question?
May.
In terms of the manufacture, are there other PFAS chemicals used in the manufacture of cookware that would be of concern?
So the industry has moved away from PFOA more than 10 years ago, I think more 13 years ago. Uh, and we are looking at ways to find best methods to make these and taking every precaution to uh, stop any release to environment. So it there is really no concern.
It sounds like what you're saying is the answer is yes, they are used in the manufacture.
There is a use of polymerization aids, but it's very, very small. It's like one drop in a swimming pool ratio. And during the curing process, they are low. So at the temperatures of we are curing, it will completely be disintegrated. So it doesn't really harm the environment or it doesn't stay in the cookware.
Members have further questions? Representative Tagliavia.
I think you might have answered it in your last statement, but I just want to make sure. During the manufacture of fluoropolymers, are PFOAs or PFOS used if they have the alkyd in their formula? Is there any way that's used to manufacture the fluoropolymers? And then the second part is, when they break down, is there any way for them to break down into that chemical that could have the alkyd and make it the pollutant that we're address here?
So I'll take it in a couple parts. So PFOS has never been used as far as I know. PFOA everybody stopped using 13 years ago. And there are actually developments of using non-PFAS polymerization aids currently available, and they are being developed, worked into the system. So we are pretty close to not using the fluorochemicals at this point. The breakdown, if you go to high temperatures, you can completely break it down to not emit any significant fluorochemical like PFOA. But during normal use, on everyday cooking, you don't have that problem.
Where are the products that you are representing made?
All over the world, really.
Who do you represent?
The Cookware and Bakeware Alliance. It's a trade association.
Who's in your alliance?
It's over 60 companies.
So give us a few examples.
Group Seb, Meyer, Tramontina, Newell, Conair.
Okay. Members have further questions? All right, Representative Chapin.
So just to clarify what you were just saying, it sounds like there are PFAS compounds that are not fluoropolymers used in the production, used to manufacture fluoropolymers, but that you are saying that at very high temperatures, that, or you also mentioned very cold temperatures, can make those PFAS compounds break down?
So the coating is cured at high temperature at the factory, and that in that process it polymerizes the PTFE and it becomes solid. But in that process, other things that might be in there, they are burnt. They are basically disintegrated at those temperatures. But they are, so we're talking about 700 Fahrenheit. But other industries, let's say, like we discussed, where you spray, let's say, something on the piece of clothing or a shoe, those things are not cured. So they are not polymerized. So that they can disintegrate and dissolve in water. And basically it could contaminate your food, a piece of food packaging. And when you eat that, you have it in your body. But that's not the same thing in PTFE in cookware because it's a solid and it's stable. It does not dissolve in water.
Okay, I guess I'm just trying to understand. It sounded like you were saying that PFAS chemicals can be broken down at high or even very low temperatures, particularly the high temperatures. Is that what you're saying?
Sure, if you have a high enough temperature, like in case of incineration, you break everything down, right? Everything becomes changing, everything starts to change. But what I'm trying to say is it is capable of totally breaking down. So let me give you an example. So if you use oils while cooking, if you go above the smoke point of the oil, you actually start disintegrating it, and it starts releasing free radicals, which are carcinogen. So people are most of the time not so aware of that, and they can overheat their oil and it smoke up the entire house and breathe that in. That's way more dangerous than what we're discussing here.
But in the manufacturing process, temperatures above 700 degrees Fahrenheit are being used to change the nature of some of these kinds of PFAS chemicals.
Right.
Is that correct?
So, yeah, so that process.
Okay.
Sorry.
All right, thanks for clarifying that.
Mm-hmm.
All right, further questions? I'm not seeing any. Thanks for your testimony.
Thank you very much.
I'd like to share. Both those could be, if you want to pull them over. We're going to hear from Katie Pelch next.
Hey, good afternoon. Can you hear me? Are you ready for me?
We are ready for you. Yes, thank you for joining
Sorry,
us.
it's hard for me to see the room a little bit. Good afternoon, members of the committee, Madam Chair. I'm Dr. Katie Pelch. I'm a senior scientist at the Natural Resources Defense Council, and I'm pleased to be here again today to discuss the legislation that's been put forth by Vermont's Agency of Natural Resources to phase out PFAS from consumer products. Today, I really want to focus on the toxic life cycle of PFAS fluoropolymers. We just heard many claims that fluoropolymers are safe, that they can't get into living things, but this really does ignore the harmful effects that they can have throughout their entire life cycle. And so I want to just take this opportunity to walk through the scientific evidence that demonstrates the harms that are attributed to fluoropolymers during their production, their use, and their disposal. And we'll start with production. So everything okay? Yep. So fluoropolymers are large molecules. We just heard that. They're built up of repeating units of smaller molecules, much like beads on a string that are stuck together to form a necklace. And I believe that we just heard that fluoropolymers like PTFE, which is the coating used in nonstick cookware, does involve use of some of the most infamous chemicals like PFOA and also Gen-X. And it's these very chemicals that have been linked to serious health problems, including kidney and liver damage, weakened immune system, and cancer. And fluoropolymer manufacturing processes that don't use these chemicals directly, unfortunately, create them in situ. So it's a very dirty process, and it actually results in the generation of many PFAS byproducts. And we know many of you have already heard the story that it's the production of fluoropolymers that have caused widespread pollution in communities that are nearby these production facilities, especially in their drinking water, and especially in places like West Virginia and North Carolina, There are many lawsuits and documented stories about this PFAS pollution. And in fact, just last month, a lawsuit was filed by the West Virginia Rivers Coalition that alleged that both PFOA and GenX continue to be discharged into the Ohio River from the Chemours Washington Works facility. So I challenge the notion that these chemicals are not in use or being created as a byproduct and released into the environment. Further, it's not just PFAS and all the harmful things that we've talked about PFAS that are being released into the air and water when fluoropolymers are produced. There are other chemicals, including the ozone damaging chlorofluorocarbons, the CFCs that we phased out so many years ago, and also the very high global warming potential chemicals that are called hydrofluorocarbons, HFCs, and hydrochlorofluorocarbons, the HCFCs, are also released, including HFC 23, which is one of the chemicals with the highest global warming potential. And the fact that that's being released in large amounts from fluoropolymer production facility should be noted. The cookware industry, let's move on to use. So the cookware industry states that their products are safe under normal conditions, and this they define as being that pans and cookware can only be used on low to medium heat. They cannot be washed with abrasive cleaners and cannot come into contact with steel utensils. And I don't know about you, but even myself, most consumers don't follow these guidelines. And many are using pans in such a way that will either cause the coating to flake off, which we can see because we all have seen, scratched up and flaked off nonstick pans, or they're using them in a way that will cause the PTFE coating to off gas. So I believe there are scientific papers that have published this, and it is around starting temperature of around 450 degrees when the PTFE can begin to off gas. And these are common temperatures that are achieved when baking or searing or broiling food. You can go to your oven and look and see what those temperatures are, and you'll see that they are within the range of 450 degrees. And when this off-gassing occurs, it can cause toxic fumes to be released that we then inhale. In fact, this is such a well-known and documented case situation that there's a name for it. It's called Teflon flu or polymer flu. And in fact, Washington Post reported that in 2023, there were several hundred cases of Teflon flu that were called into poison control centers. And we think that this is likely an underreporting because how many of us think, when we get sick later in the evening, that it could be due to the cooking that occurred hours earlier? It takes a little bit while for those flu symptoms to really take it, to really show and us put the connections together that might have been to cooking. So it's pretty remarkable that several hundred people called into poison control centers and that they documented this to be flu-like symptoms related to Teflon flu. Another use scenario, again, that we've seen because we all have these pots and pans or have been in contact with these types of pots and pans in our everyday life, is scratched up in nonstick pans. So as that nonstick coating is scratched and flaked off, it's creating micro and nanoplastics that then contaminate our food and that we ingest. We just heard that these microplastics are also extremely persistent, and there is a growing body of evidence that finds that they too can harm health. They're found throughout our body. There was just a study released that found microplastics in the human brain. They are found in breast milk and in all different parts of our human body. In fact, it's not even quite known how quickly they can be removed from our body because that evidence is still growing. There is a study, however, that found increased levels of PTFE specifically, that fluoropolymer that's used to cook or to coat nonstick cookware, in semen, and the people that had the highest levels also had reduced sperm counts. So I challenge the notion that there are no health effects related to the use of PFAS polymers, specifically in cookware. And then if we move and talk about the end of use and the disposal, Unfortunately, there are no safe ways to dispose of or recycle PFAS polymers, including cookware. Do we really want these persistent plastics building up in our landfills over time? Recycling is also not a safe option, and there's a good case, a good like little scenario or case study in Henderson, Kentucky, where there was a large PFAS polymer recycler, and it was found that this PFAS polymer recycler was taking the scrap metal from these types of processes that we're hearing about. And it was found that the local environment was contaminated with astonishingly high levels of PFAS. And this wasn't just water that was contaminated that we might be able to clean up by using filters, but also the soil and the sediments and the groundwater aquifer as well. And those are environmental matrices that are even harder to clean up. And so that contamination is going to be there for many, many years into the future. We also heard a little bit about incineration. And sure, very, very, very high levels for a sustained amount of time of incineration can break up PFAS molecules, including polymers. But that's not the level of incineration that you're seeing in municipal incinerators. Instead, the levels of temperature that are reached for the amount of time that those temperatures are reached, they're high, but they are not high enough to fully mineralize these polymers to carbon and fluorine. Instead, those incineration scenarios are known to create numerous byproducts, and those products are often referred to as products of incomplete combustion. And currently, we do not have ways to measure all these many different shattered PFAS molecules because it shatters not in like a typical and consistent way. So you're shattering these PFAS polymers and creating a whole mess of chemicals that we have no way to monitor for or clean up. So incineration is not a feasible solution to end of life for PFAS polymers, especially those if we're thinking about in our cookware. I believe you also received testimony yesterday or this week that indicated that nonstick cookware was not only used in homes, but also in many restaurants, and that all of these cooking surfaces would need to be replaced. And so I just want to remind the committee that this is really a red herring. As you know, the bill is not mandating that all nonstick cookware surfaces be removed and replaced. It's simply applying to the sale of new products. And you're also aware, I think, that Vermont is not the first state to consider this. There's already a law in effect in Minnesota. It went into effect January 1st that bans PFAS in cookware. And I've spoken to folks on the ground there and have heard that all of the major retailers there, including Costco, Menards, Macy's, Targets, they all are going above and beyond. They've set up end caps and advertising that says PFAS-free cookware. So this clearly demonstrates that this is a health protective action that can be easily implemented, not years in the future, but today, right now. So before I close, I just will add that I didn't touch on fluorinated containers yet, but I understand that that was also a question the committee might have had. So I'm happy to talk more about that or answer some questions. But I do just want to leave you with this idea that it was the PFAS crisis really did start with understanding that the pollution, the widespread pollution that we're aware of, came to light due to the manufacturing of PFAS polymers. And the production, use, and disposal of these substances is still causing massive contamination today, not just in West Virginia, not just in North Carolina, but all the places where these products are being recycled and put into landfills. So we should really learn from our past history and take the action that's needed to protect public health and the environment, especially when there are already safe alternatives that are widely and easily available for uses that Vermont is considering regulating.
Thank you for your testimony and for joining us on short notice. We do have a lot of questions. I'm going to ask the committee, to the extent possible, to let's focus on the fluoropolymers first, and then we can move on to the containers. Do members have questions? Representative Bartholomew.
So do I understand you correctly that you're saying, we've been told that these compounds, they don't break down, they're not water soluble, and they're not absorbed by the human body. And I seem to be hearing you say that that is inaccurate.
So when they are on the pan, that is true. They are large polymers, right? You wouldn't, another way to think about the polymers is like a stack of Legos. Individually, they're small. You could get them in your body, but when they're all stacked together, they're too big to go through your body and move into your bloodstream. But we know that PTFE, like used in cookware, can break off and flake off, and does break off and flake off during normal use and wear, and forms microplastics. We know that those are found throughout the body. They're not simply just excreted, otherwise they would not be found in semen. And we know that those people who had higher levels of PTFE in their semen had lower sperm counts. So some of them might go through our body, but some of them might not. The rate at which these molecules move through the body is not known yet. But because they are persistent chemicals, there is a concern, and persistent chemicals and persistent particles, both, there's a concern that they could build up in our bodies over time.
I guess I'm confused. And is it then the microplastics that are getting into being absorbed and not the fluoropolymers?
So the fluoropolymers are the microplastics. And then if you think about like a little chunk of plastic sitting in your body, it's sitting there over time, and it can, at some rate that is unknown, slowly release fluorinated chemicals. But the fact that the microplastic goes in your body and like lodges into your intestinal lining, for example, or wherever, it can release chemicals over time, and it can serve as like a depot for releasing those chemicals over time.
So we've heard from two different representatives of the cookware industry that the molecules in the fluoropolymers pass through the body and head out to the environment, and unknown what they do out there, but we're not supposed to be concerned about it. But that's what we've been hearing. How do you respond to that?
I mean, even PFOA comes out of our body, right? It just comes out of our body at an extremely slow rate, like years. It takes years to come out. So whether or not we're talking about the individual chemicals or the plastic polymers that have flaked off, they do go into our body and they do last there for a long time. And the health effects of either the individual chemicals or the plastic particles that are there are concerning.
Other members have questions? Representative Austin.
The other testimony we heard is that the fluoropolymers were backed by the American Cancer Society, an environmental working group, U.S. Food and Drug. And just wondering, like, has the American Medical Association come out with any warnings about them?
I don't recall off the top of my head if the AMA specifically, the American Medical Association, has, but I know that other medical societies like I think it's the American College of Gynecology and Obstetrics and American Academy of Pediatrics have statements on PFAS, in particular, and concerns about PFAS. I'm not sure if they specifically have addressed polymers. I will also say that the indication that the Environmental Working Group supports the use of fluoropolymers is very disingenuous. The Environmental Working Group, I do not work for them, but they are colleagues, and they have been at the forefront of raising the alarm on the health concerns associated not just with PFAS, but on the production and use of fluoropolymer. And I did see the written testimony that was submitted, and that was a very cherry-picked line from a single web page where they were trying to put into perspective for a certain audience where the highest risk of exposure might be. And sure, if you are in a very highly contaminated community, your first the first action you should take or might want to consider taking to protect yourself from further exposure would be to get access to clean, safe drinking water. That doesn't mean that PFAS, that the production, use, or disposal of PFAS didn't contribute to your unclean water, right? So that is kind of the context of that website and that line that was picked out of in that testimony.
Thank you.
Representative North.
Thank you, Chair. Is the medical industry actively moving away from using fluoropolymers from catheters and pacemakers and things like that, or are they continuing to use fluoropolymers in those activities?
I do not work with the medical industry, so I can't speak to that directly. I will say that just because chemicals are used in a medical setting does not mean they are safe. Phthalates, for example, are a really good example of that. So phthalates are very well known and extremely well documented to disrupt the androgen signaling, which is a hormone, like testosterone is an androgen. But yet those chemicals are used in numerous medical devices and medical IV tubing and, fluid bags. So just because a chemical is used in a medical setting does not mean it's safe, and it does not mean that it should be allowed for continued use in everyday products where they're not needed. So we know that there are safe alternatives to fluoropolymers and cookware.
So given that they are sound like not necessarily being moved away from it, and they've been put into many patients, that we should have a pretty sizable population to conduct a study. So what peer-reviewed scientific journals, especially from the health arena, do we have that show that these fluoropolymers are causing medical issues?
Again, we're not setting up studies. That's not a question that I think has been addressed. But we're mostly concerned when people are having pacemakers and stents put in, whether or not there is an alleviation of their cardiac events. So I don't think it would really be beneficial to society to understand that. I also just want to make a note that the use of fluoropolymers in pacemakers is exceedingly different than the use of fluoropolymers in cookware. In pacemakers, we're not exposing them to 500 degrees Fahrenheit, 700 degrees Fahrenheit. We're not scratching them continually and repeatedly with, abrasive either chemicals or other, cleaning devices or utensils. So the use is exceedingly different than in a cookware setting.
Right, but still even on the cookware, if you scratch it, you were referring to them as microplastics. You're still getting the whole fluoropolymer chain, albeit maybe just a couple of molecules that you've scratched off in your body. You're not literally cutting with a knife the molecules. You're getting microplastics into your body. So it's the same exact chemical that's being applied. It's just in smaller pieces rather than a coating on a pacemaker. So it's still in the body, right?
It's still in the body. And we know from other types of research on particles. So the particle science is a little bit different than like chemical science. We know that having particles in our body can be harmful. It can cause, an inflammatory response, a localized inflammatory response that can have, all kinds of negative sequelae after that. So the fact that there are particles of any type aren't great.
Right. So that's true of any microplastic, not specifically the fluoropolymer.
Correct. And I would say that even medical devices, we get a biological response to their presence. Our bodies form scar tissue and work to encapsulate that in other scenarios as well.
Thank you.
So there is a biological response.
Representative Bartholomew.
As Representative Sheldon said earlier, we've heard from a couple of scientists and chemists that representing the cookware industry which kind of reminds me of scientists representing the petroleum industry telling us climate change isn't real. So I'm just wondering, can you tell me or tell us a little bit more about your own credentials to be talking about this and who you represent?
Sure. I am a senior scientist at the Natural Resources Defense Council. We are an advocacy-based environmental NGO. I have a PhD in developmental biology, and I have worked in understanding the impact of environmental chemicals on human health since my graduate training. I have worked on other chemical classes beyond PFAS, including bisphenols and so BPA, the other plastic chemicals. I think that's that. Yeah, is that helpful? I don't know how much
It is.
detail you want me to go into.
And are you able to provide some references from referee journals that back up some of what you've said?
Absolutely. In fact, I submitted that, I think, to Annika last night. So I submitted kind of a fact sheet that has, it was an updated one. So this is not a new story, right? So there's continually new science coming out, new, I push back a little bit on the accusation that advocates refer to newspapers and media articles. Not every single announcement or finding gets published in the peer-reviewed literature. I'm pretty sure that all of you don't go looking to the peer-reviewed literature to find out, what is going on in your local town or community. The newspaper stories are so impactful and meaningful to people on the ground. Like, what is being detected here today from this situation? And those are the types of media articles that I have cited in the fact sheet that I've given you, like the Henderson, Kentucky example. As you probably are aware with the ongoing discussions, studying that real quickly and spinning up the funding to do that is not possible for independent academic scientists, for the most part, to like jump into an immediate need situation. That's not to say that they don't. But like the on the grounds kind of like reporting is important. And I don't want to discount those types of findings that are reported in the media as well. And those are backed up, of course, by science once it just is a little bit longer process.
So we're running out of time and we have another witness at 1:45. And I guess high level, if you want to, can you share some of your thoughts on the fluorinated containers conversation, if you've been able to get kind of the latest in our latest draft, or yeah, have you? You look like maybe you're ready.
I haven't quite gotten up to speed exactly where you are, but just at a really high level, when plastics are fluorinated, so plastics again are polymers, but they're carbon and hydrogen polymers. They don't have fluorine replacing those hydrogen atoms. And so what they do is they just take this plastic polymer and they apply fluorine gas. And wherever those fluorines stick, you now have created a PFAS, what we call in situ. So you've created the PFAS right there. But because polymers aren't exactly perfectly repeating blocks, they're kind of different a little bit. There are different PFAS that get made during this process, including many, many long chain PFAS, like even bigger than PFOA. So it's a really messy process. The chemical industry doesn't have a way to control it so that, for example, we are only creating PFBS, a short chain. They're creating many different PFAS when they fluorinate those plastics. So writ large, I think that it's a safe choice to not allow for fluorinated plastics to be used for any use. And then, especially because there are already plastics available that aren't fluorinated.
You here? Just let me know. Okay, good. Do members have questions on fluorinated containers? We had one outstanding, Representative North. We ended kind of with Michael on a question you had, I think, about containers and the need for them, I think, for gasoline. We do have our next witness, and she's the Attorney General, so she's got a tight schedule.
Yeah, my question for Michael is more just how is that handled within the legal structure?
Yeah. Do members have further questions on the containers for Katie?
Very quick,
Yes.
going back, in the handout, when you say PFAS polymers, is that the same thing as the fluoropolymers? Mean the same thing?
Yes, it means the
Yes.
same.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you again for joining us.
Yes, thank you for this opportunity.
Thank
Happy
you.
to answer further questions.
Great. We may have those. Thanks. Attorney General Clark. Hello. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm sorry I'm not in person. I really prefer that, but unfortunately my schedule did not allow me to come in person. Do I appear frozen to you or do you see me?
Yes.
in-
Yeah, well, you just unfroze, but you were frozen.
Just like
We'll see if it
interrupt.
works.
Okay, interrupt me. I did get a notice earlier that my Wi-Fi was not working and I was wondering if the world was conspiring to allow me to go skiing instead of working today, but apparently the Wi-Fi is back. So
Sorry.
my Bluebird
I don't
days
know what
have
you're
been
doing.
foiled. Yeah.
We hate to keep you from that. I think I'll ask in the interest of time, have you been briefed or are you following, or shall we give you a summary of where we are and why we asked you in?
I've been briefed. My understanding is you're about to vote this bill out and we just want our kind of take on things.
Well, that was our hope, but we still want your take on things.
Yes. Well, you'll be, if you're ready to take a vote, I don't think my testimony will change the direction that you're taking because we support the bill. I know that, and I've testified on different versions of a PFAS bill in the consumer context before. And so I luckily was able to come and testify myself here today because it was not a heavy lift. This is very similar. It takes a very similar approach to previous bills that I know the legislature has passed. I will say that I know from past bills that the concept of the intentionally added definition has been a subject of interest. From our view, we like the definition that's in the latest draft of the bill because it clarifies that if you add PFAS during the manufacturing process, you are subject to the ban. I also was given some context with Rhode Island's approach to this, and my office, we all agree we like their approach as well. I think that's a little different than what you're doing, but just an FYI for you, we like that one too. We didn't have a lot of information about the exemption for using water with PFAS in it, so I'm that we'll just stay neutral as to that point for now. I don't, because we didn't really do a deep dive on that one, but I will say overall we're happy with this. We kind of like the working group approach a little bit better, but in general, this comports with the philosophy that I have taken and our position from the office more generally. So we're happy to be adding this potentially to our kind of list of consumer protections we have here in Vermont. I think it really aligns with what consumers want here in Vermont, which is a sensible approach to protecting their health and making sure that the products they are purchasing they can rely on. So I know you're in a rush. That's the quick and dirty. I don't think there's anything groundbreaking there, but I'm happy to answer any questions or, if that's all you needed, that's fine too.
Yeah, we're not in a rush. We thought maybe you might be.
I do have other meetings to get to, but I carved this out, so I'm here.
Okay, great. Thank you. I had a question. We have gone a little bit back and forth and on, I think it's on the fluorinated containers, and because of the language that came from the working group and from Act 131 included a rulemaking provision around that. I think it was containers. So which we've taken that out for now, but I'm curious what do you engage in rulemaking, and would that be a game changer for you if we had rulemaking in here?
We do engage in rulemaking. we have general rulemaking authority under the Consumer Protection Act. So FYI, it's in there anyway. We don't do it that often. It's obviously very time consuming, but it can be very effective. Some of our really, thinking of particularly the propane rule, we went through a process. I think this was even before my time, but it was just before my time with propane. And right now, propane, the rules that we have in place are incredibly protective and probably save lives because it makes sure that people have heating fuel in the winter. And that was something that was done mostly through rulemaking. It's just, as you know, it's hard to get everything done during the legislative process. So having that process available is helpful.
That was really helpful too. Do members have further questions for the Attorney General? Representative North.
Thank you for joining us today. What you mentioned a working group approach. Maybe I'm just
That was the Matt Chapman's original bill.
Okay.
Remember that
Regulatory.
went to A&R and changed the definition of PFAS and sort of was the beginning of our journey
Okay.
to get
All right.
to where we are.
Okay.
And I mean, I think out of interest, we decided to because that working group recommendation kind of pushed out the major changes, we decided to kind of add to the products that were in Act 131 as opposed to going that big step at this time.
Sorry, that's just a process.
Yeah, sure. Representative Austin.
Do you know how other states or how many other states are kind of aligned with Vermont with this legislation?
I actually don't know that off the top of my head, but I can get that information and email you later this afternoon.
Okay. And just see if they have any outcomes or recommendations or things they would have changed or something. That'd be
Okay.
great. Thank you.
Sure thing.
Representative Cheney.
And just on that, Sarita, we did receive today, and it's on our documents from today, Safer States website, State Action on PFAS, that has a whole chart
Okay.
that's been provided to us.
Oh, yeah, we've seen it.
Tracks all of that. We saw it earlier in testimony too, so I'm not exactly sure that.
Oh, I see.
That may answer your question.
Yeah.
So we may not need to
Yeah,
burden the.
Yeah.
I didn't see that.
I think we have the answer.
We have that information, it turns out.
So safer states.
It's under Anna.
Yep, thank you.
Before we let you go, I would like to ask our legislative counsel if you have any questions for the Attorney General or things that we might be missing. That we need.
Right now.
Okay, thanks. All right, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me,
Thank you.
guys, and enjoy the weekend.
Yeah, I hope you get out skiing soon.
Thanks.
Michael, do you want to join us? Yeah. We had a couple things we asked you about. I'm not. Where are you at? I don't want to assume that you've had time to address them. I guess I'm wondering, have you?
Write another bill.
Um,
So one was, I'm just gonna walk through my notes if that's okay. On page 3 in the definition of intentionally added, you wanted PFAS that serves an intended function to revert back to a chemical in a product that serves an intended function.
yes.
There was the new language on the way to monitor, water, or gauge whether water is the source of the intentionally added PFAS. I don't think I heard any questions from that. I just wanted to flag that again. Then really the next set of issues, questions is the fluorine treated containers. And whether or not you want to ban any container on page 11, 1 through 3, is this, as it's written, would only ban the consumer product in the container.
Right.
You had that discussion of whether to ban all fluorine treated containers.
Yeah, which is the way it was in the report.
From Act 131, yes, with the caveat that it was the Act 131 definition of PFAS.
Chapin, do you have thoughts on this?
My thoughts are, I could leave it the way it is. I think we're moving in this direction no matter what, but I also don't feel like we got a lot of questions answered on fluorine containers.
Not sure what that means. Representative Bartholomew.
I want to make sure I understand this correctly. So using an example, say Florowax, if you put, and according to this, if you put Florowax in a container to sell to consumers, it can't
be a fluorine treated container.
but if you sell it in a barrel for commercial use, it can. If, with this.
I think that, yes, because the wholesale product, the
It's not a
industrial
consumer
product, it's not a consumer product.
So it's reminding me of Florowax as one of the big challenges in our schools, right? Like, that's how we're exposing our children. Beautiful.
And our environment, we scrape it up with the. Are we talking the product or the container?
The container, we're talking about the containers here.
Well, historically, the
about
product,
both.
and then this wouldn't touch those products potentially. Would it?
No, I mean, part of the issue is that Title IX consumer protection is about protecting consumers and ensuring consumer products are fairly sold, et cetera. It doesn't define consumer products.
Oh dear, that would get Mike Marcotte's attention if we started to define consumer products.
Well, you define them in other places, Title X, the EPR programs define consumer products, but it's a curious thing. You can find a definition of consumer, but you can't find the definition of consumer products.
So I think I'm hearing for now, we leave it the way it is.
Well, I mean, I think we,
Representative-
just a question, I guess. Michael, my understanding is we got this from the Maine methodology.
Partly, yes.
Partly, yeah.
I mean,
Did we take the whole thing?
you can't do the one-to-one transfer over just the way that their statute is structured. But the language, part of the language is from Maine.
I think the Maine statute.
And the main language is really in sub B, not in sub C.
Okay. But didn't it have some more exemptions for specific items, like things that are under DOT control? It was one of them.
I did not see that, but I can look again.
And that would take care of the gas can thing. Just want to make sure that we got it all. It's not one-to-one, so challenging.
What does get it all mean to you?
If Maine had put in place a container, fluorinated container ban.
Oh, and then they had exemptions in other places.
They had exemptions, or they might have appeared in other places, but
Well, that's why it's hard to grab language.
yeah,
from other
that's the
statutes.
one challenge. Yeah. Just want to make sure that we grab it all.
minor heights exemptions, that makes sense. For,
Are you wanting to comment on this particular topic, Mr. Driscoll, or are you
Because I,
on this topic?
yes, because I know where the DOT exemption is, because I brought it up in previous testimony. I think it's under exemption, but it's each.
H. Like, see it. What section number are you looking at? Are you referring
That's the
to?
exemption section, I don't.
we have unavoidable use.
We didn't,
We didn't carry it over because the scope of this is so targeted.
Yeah, so targeted, but this container thing kind of broadens it back out again.
You just keep going.
No, we're leaving it, I think, right now,
not. we
not
have
broadening
no-
it.
Just need to see.
No unavoidable use, well, broadening it meaning doing all containers by 2030
Right, right,
feels broad,
right.
and then feels like,
Feels like
are we?
either we need to put some, allow the AG to put some rulemaking capabilities, which maybe she said she probably already does, so maybe.
Could-
So here we are.
Put that back in.
The rulemaking.
Right. Product required to meet standards or requirements of the U.S. Department of Transportation, NASA, Department of Defense, Homeland Security, except that the exemption does not apply to any textile article or refrigerant that is included in or as a component part of such products. So that is what is exempt.
Specifically for containers.
No, for everything. The following are exempt from the whole section.
But remind us that, I mean, does Maine have just a broader ban
Consumer products
on
ban,
consume, like beyond what we're doing?
and it's regulatory.
Yeah, so I don't think we can compare to Maine. I'm not sure that's productive.
It feels like we could either put the rulemaking back in. It feels like we need more time on somebody's part to understand fluorinated containers a little bit better.
Aha, the Senate.
That's it. To the Senate.
No, I mean, that's valid at this point. So,
There's more, we need more time on this. We could leave it as is and expect the Senate to work on it. We could add the rulemaking back in for the AG. We could turn this into a report from ANR to give us
I'm gonna
recommendations.
just ask one question about what Attorney General Clark just said about the rulemaking, Michael. I mean, would the statute still have to direct a boundary? Or, I mean, could the Attorney General just pick anything here and do rulemaking on it?
She can't pick anything. She can't conflict with statute. So that's
So, I mean,
something that the agencies actually struggle with.
yeah.
But she does have rulemaking authority, generally in that chapter. And so I think that her general authority is to implement the requirements of this chapter, which has been determined by the Supreme Court to be sufficient boundaries for delegation.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I just needed clarification.
Yeah.
You're sort of saying,
I was just trying to identify different places where this could get more detailed or more scrutiny so that we make sure we're not missing a particularly important exemption but also not narrow it so much that we're really missing.
Not covering what we want.
Yeah.
Representative Barthel.
So am I understanding that we wouldn't have to add it because she's got the authority already?
That's what I was trying to figure.
Sort of what she said, but we could also just be explicit that
Be
we
clear.
expect
We can.
rulemaking on this topic.
Yeah.
I will say that your LCARD committee likes more specific delegations than the broad delegations, and they have written you letters repeatedly over the past 20 years asking you to do that.
Been here for 20 years.
And to varying degrees of success in that. It's so easy to say just,
Right, so I think that would folks be more comfortable if we did that? And hearing that would be what we'd like to do.
So it's in that definition, fluorine treated container. It's the definition that's there, or other containers,
However, it was written before, I think
right?
wasn't it sort of one of the, like something that there's no replacement for or something.
Sure. I could do that if you would like.
If we're doing that, do we want to take out the word consumer? Any product in a fluorine treated container?
I'm sorry, what's that?
If we're adding the rulemaking, do we want to leave in this section, subsection C, do we want to take out the word consumer since that may be limiting us in ways that we don't want to be limited? Just be broad around fluorine treated containers. Like we were using the floor wax for schools in bulk as an example.
Can the AG do that because it's mainly consumer protection?
Well, I don't know if it does anything if we're in the consumer protection chapter or statute, so.
I'm going to read to you the definition of consumer. Any person who purchases, leases, contracts for, or otherwise agrees to pay considerations for goods or services not for resale in the ordinary course of the person's trade or business, but for the person's use or benefit, or the use or benefit of the member of the person's household, or in connection with the operation of the person's household or farm, whether or not the farm is connected as a trade or business, or a person who purchases, leases, contracts, or otherwise pays or agrees to pay consideration for goods or services in the person's trade or business, but for the use or benefit of the person's business, or in connection with the operation of the person's business.
Does that cover floor wax in schools?
Attorney.
I mean, any person is usually a business or anything.
Right.
So that's a funny way to start that.
Well, yes, the definition of person defaulting to Title I is anything you can think of.
Organization.
It's the individual, corporate person, corporal person, but it's also a corporate entity, business, partnership, municipality, etc.
I guess I think we should leave it the way it is and ask you to make the other the rulemaking clarification.
Sure.
And then I know that Bill Driscoll would like to share some thoughts. I'd like to keep Michael O'Grady here. I mean, yeah, so.
Physically though, sorry.
Well, sort of. I mean, I'm not sure what the nature of your comments are.
Yeah, sure, I can speak from here. So, Bill Driscoll, an associate in the Institute of Vermont. So this recent conversation about fluorinated containers. I'll have to be interested to see how it plays out, whether it addresses some of our concerns. But yeah, I just did want to point out, we already kind of got into it a little bit, that the language for covering the containers for covered products does come from Maine, and that makes sense. Just the issue is whether or not that's not necessarily sufficient to accommodate situations where there are unavoidable uses or there aren't suitable alternatives for all cases, even within the covered products. And I think two of the ways that might work in Maine is because that definition of fluorinated container is within the context of two other things that the Maine statute has. One of which is that transportation exemption, which was just discussed, and also the Maine statute has a unavoidable use exemption process, and that applies to all of its various provisions. But that provides for the ability to deal with the unintended consequences or unavoidable uses for fluorinated containers. So, we would prefer to see both of those elements in here along with that definition of fluorinated container.
I think we just talked about adding unavoidable use.
Yeah, well, that's what I said.
That's one of them. What's the
Right.
other one?
So the other issue is, oh, well, and yeah, and just to be thorough, I think that if we're looking at the broad, all fluorinated containers in 2030, I'm trying to confirm, but I would assume that the European regulations also have similar mechanisms as well. So my question or concern about the intentionally added definition, we are running the language by folks in the hopes to see how far the manufacturing process language addresses our concerns. We'll be happy to give feedback when we get more reaction to that. The water provisions. So I think we would prefer the language in draft 1.4 and not use the drinking water quality thresholds. I think our concern is that if a manufacturer is using a non-public water source and it doesn't happen to meet the drinking water standards through no action of the manufacturer, I'm not sure if it makes sense that they would no longer be able to make that product. I think this is a similar issue that Martin Wolf raised at the very beginning. Is the drinking water standard doesn't really have much relevance to whether or how much trace PFAS might be in the product, and certainly not comparable to the exposure to people from that product, if any, compared to drinking the water. And so even the distinction between a water source that is slightly below the threshold and a water source that is slightly above, I don't really see the rational distinction there as to whether this is allowable if the other one isn't in terms of manufacturing. It would seem to be much simpler. The previous language, I believe, just simply said that that as long as the manufacturer wasn't adding PFAS to the water, that water as the source of the PFAS would not be a ban. I don't know, Mike wants to.
I can read that
Read it,
language
yeah.
if you want. PFAS shall not be considered intentionally added if the chemical is present in the product due to use of water containing PFAS and the manufacturer took no action that resulted in the PFAS being present in the water. And I would say I like the use of the word processed water, which is in the current version, because it relates to it's a term used for the manufacturing process.
As opposed to what water?
I think I've been.
Just water. I mean, processed water is like what the water used in manufacturing. I like that term better.
That you're using to make the beer that you're going to drink, but just like to wash the bottles.
And I can split the knot.
That's an important thing.
Pardon?
I mean, the product water matters, but like if it's in the beer. So I guess I don't want to get too wound around this, but like you're saying the processed water wouldn't be considered intentionally added, but if it was in the beer, it would be? It's the same water.
I think the earlier part of this definition captures if it was in the beer because the water used in the beer.
It's the final product.
I don't know.
But that's a really good point, because using water that's contaminated and it ends up in the product, but that is, to me, that's a different thing than water just to wash the product when you're done or whatever.
Right, that's why Friday afternoon editing.
You should.
Anyway, we'll stick with what you like, Michael. And
Well, I like the term processed water.
I
don't have a preference between what Bill is asking for and what's the MCL language.
yeah, no, I get that. I don't want to, right, so I want to stick to one question at a time, which is how are people feeling about going back to the previous definition versus this one that parsed it out more into A and B? Preferences?
I like the previous one myself.
two.
Okay, we'll go back to the previous.
What did the previous one say?
The previous one, I'll just read the entire definition. Intentionally added means the addition of a chemical that serves an intended, well, this isn't, I'm gonna read just about the water. PFAS shall not be considered intentionally added if the chemical is present in the product due to use of water containing PFAS and the manufacturer took no action that resulted in the PFAS being present in the water.
You would change those two waters to be processed. This entire sentence is about the manufacturing process, not the ingredients of the final product.
I just remembering an earlier version where we had the public water system and
Well, that's
that
what
caused us
you're,
to divide this.
that's what you're discussing, right?
Right, but that's not in this.
No, it is not. That's the discussion.
Okay, so we'll go back to the previous one.
Can I ask back to the currently unavoidable? Because I think Bill and you might have been talking about two different scopes.
Okay.
I think you were talking about currently unavoidable for fluorine treated containers. Is that correct?
Yes.
Bill's talking about currently unavoidable for the entire program.
That's our primary position, yes.
For every product on the list?
Well, we've asked for that all along.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I'm saying within the spectrum of options, preferable is
Yeah.
because that's again what other states that do this have. But if it's
So the Attorney General would be adopting rules regarding fluorine treated containers, including an exemption to allow for containers when the use of PFAS is currently unavoidable.
Something like that. Yeah, I mean. Yes. Representative Chapin.
And just to remind the committee, we didn't include when we moved from an ANR regulatory program to the AG working with this under consumer products, it didn't feel to us that it made any sense for the AG's office in a non-regulatory structure or in the consumer protection structure to be creating the unintentionally, what is that? The
Currently unavoidable.
currently unavoidable use. It's used in regulatory programs like in Maine. And that makes sense in a regulatory structure with an entity like ANR. Whereas the AG's office isn't really set up to have staff reviewing application after application about this particular product. So under fluorine containers and that rulemaking, I think it makes sense across all of the products that have already been prohibited, and I don't think it makes sense to do it across. If we were moved to a regulatory program at ANR, I think it would make a lot of sense.
Representative Austin.
Yeah, so when it says currently unavoidable, is the assumption that when something comes online that can make it avoidable, that we assume that the manufacturer will go in that direction? Like for an alternative to PFAS?
So it could, because this is the definition of currently unavoidable use. It's the use of a PFAS that the Maine Department of Environmental Protection has determined by rule to be essential for health, safety, or the functioning of society, and for which alternatives are not reasonably available. So if there was an alternative that became available, then
It would not, yeah, gotcha. Okay.
and just for purposes of next iteration of the draft, I'm probably going to use a definition of currently unavoidable that's similar to this.
Be good. Representative Morris.
Yeah, before we leave the water, I'm on page 3 of 2.1. We talk about PFAS not being considered intentionally added to water process. Processed water used in the manufacturing of the product was from, and then A says public water system, and I understand we may be moving away from that.
Mm-hmm.
But B says a water source that does not violate the maximum contaminant levels.
Right, and I think that's, I think the public water system, I think everyone's okay with that. I think what the problem is when you go to a non-public water system that's not required to manage their water to the MCL levels because it's not a public drinking water system, and I don't even want to go into those definitions because.
It's there, we know it there.
Right. And so it's not tested for that. It's just used for manufacturing process, industrial, commercial process. You don't manage that water. You don't test that water for the MCL. And so I think Bill's concern is that they would be prohibited from selling a product or manufacturing a product because they're using a source of water that isn't subject to the MCL requirement. Right?
So if they were making like a beer, would they have to test that well? Or are we?
Well, if you're going to be using an input for final human consumption,
You have to test.
then it has to meet the MCLs.
That's a separate law somewhere else.
Apparently, yes.
It's the drinking water standards. And I just don't want to open that door of what's a non-public public drinking water system.
No, don't. It's okay.
Yeah, that part's okay, but it's the contaminant. We don't want them using the leachate from Coventry landfill to
So-
wash their beer bottles.
But Representative Morris, we're moving away from this A/B thing. So going back to the previous version. All right, folks, any other input or questions on this? Yep. Okay. All right. Thank you, Michael. I guess we'll see a hopefully final version when we get back and be moving this out.
I have a question on stormwater.
Great.
This morning, when I was removing a section, I think I removed too much. It was the extension of the 3-acre deadline in Champlain and for Magog. I assume you still want that in there and you wanted to push back to 28. Thankfully, Jared pointed that out to me. That was probably against Jared's best interest, but I think I just grabbed or selected a bunch of text and didn't realize I had selected that text.
And we wanted to keep the Connecticut in.
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right. Any other thoughts for Friday afternoon? Thank you, Michael. And members, have a great break, and we'll see you back on Tuesday following the break.